One sunny morning, the unbearable screams of children echoed near the school. The students were bullying a girl, calling her a witch. They also thought she was contagious and were afraid to even accidentally touch her. Physical violence was part of it too, as they constantly pulled her hair and shoved her around. Afterward, they would run off to wash their hands, trying to scrub off the dirt they thought they might catch from her. The poor girl had to endure this treatment every day, and all she could do was cry. Then one day, she met another girl who was different from the rest, as she didn't join in the bullying. On the contrary, she stood up for her and promised to tell the teacher everything the next day. Moreover, she tried to befriend her, asking if everything was okay and how she felt. In that moment, the tearful girl believed in the existence of God and thought he had sent her a guardian angel with whom she would spend her life. But one day, a terrible tragedy struck as her savior didn't respond, and it was unclear what had really happened to her. Strangely enough, one missed call could change the fate of people forever. For right before her eyes, the girl witnessed the murder of her best friend, who had been her angel sent from heaven. This was a true shock for her. She tried to scream to the lifeless Mei, but it was already too late. At that moment, Qianxia didn't realize that this tragedy would change her life forever. From then on, her life became unbearable as she had to endure threats. These threats were directly related to Mei's death. They threatened her with violence and promised to end her life just like Mei's. She also faced constant gossip and whispers behind her back. Photos of her friend were sent in a group chat, and countless people mocked her. Moreover, they kept forwarding her pictures to each other, demanding payment for them. There was also a conspiracy against her, and real stalking began. All the events that unfolded in her life after her best friend's death drove her to a desperate step. Standing on the edge of a high-rise building, she was ready to jump to end her suffering. Just then, in her moment of greatest despair, he appeared. A demon who descended from the heavens. The boy was incredibly handsome, and he had come to save her. He wasn't an ordinary god, and as it turned out, the girl had been waiting for his arrival for a long time. Finally, Bai Jiho was able to hear her, and at that moment it was time to fulfill his promise. The scene shifted to the past, where a still-living Mei sat on top of a building. She was breathing heavily and was about to end her life. Her phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Notifications kept coming from people who had seen her photos and were messaging her privately. It was especially hard for her to read and see how her life was falling apart. But she understood she was powerless to fix anything. She realized there was no way back. So, she planned to talk to Qianxia one last time and wanted to say goodbye. She didn't give up hope of reaching her, as she desperately wanted to hear her voice. But she couldn't even think that Qianxia might be in trouble. Unknown people had grabbed her on the street and accused her of flirting with their crush and even touching him. As proof, they showed her a photo of them together, but she had no idea who they were talking about. She stared at the photo for a long time, trying to figure out who that person was. And she wanted to remember what day it had happened. But it was just a regular customer at their bakery who had come to pick up his order. Qianxia felt that something terrible had happened to her friend and wanted to meet her as soon as possible. However, the girls wouldn't calm down and wouldn't let her go, despite her pleas. Suddenly, they lunged at her, trying to snatch her personal belongings and phone. But it fell out of her bag and shattered as it hit the ground. Meanwhile, Mei could only hear the buzzing and that the line was unavailable. This weighed heavily on her. She was utterly exhausted. Just then, Qianxia managed to escape and grab her phone. Putting it back together, she saw a bunch of missed calls from her friend and realized something terrible had happened. When she called her, she understood it was already too late. She begged for forgiveness for not being able to answer right away and tried to make things right. Qianxia ran, trying to save her friend. She didn't want her to go through the same horror and was convinced that everything that had happened to her would eventually pass. Suddenly, Mei hung up. She said that after her death, everything around would become easier. Qianxia almost reached the building but realized she was just a few minutes too late. She was the only person who could have saved her, but because of what had happened, she couldn't do anything. People around began to scream in horror at what they saw. Panic broke out in the city, and it was unclear how everything would end. Mei's mangled body lay in the middle of the street, and Qianxia witnessed the horror firsthand. That scene and her friend's death became the worst day of her life. She couldn't believe she was gone, that they would never be able to talk or spend time together again. She was the dearest person in her life, and she was the one with whom she shared all her secrets. Her legs gave way and she nearly lost consciousness. Qianxia couldn't understand why she had done this and was ready to do anything to turn back time. She blamed herself for her death and would never forgive herself for what had happened. After a while, the death scene was cordoned off with tape. The girl's body was taken away by an ambulance. It was so mangled that she was unrecognizable. The people who witnessed the tragedy couldn't believe that a young girl could do such a thing to herself. Qianxia couldn't come to terms with it for a long time. She didn't speak at all and couldn't eat anything for a while. Suddenly, she heard boys talking about the dead Mei behind her. As it turned out, they knew her and even went to the same school. Moreover, they had seen her photo and were sharing it in their group chat. They also exchanged photos with others, spreading them all over the city. The worst part was that even after her death, they continued to talk about her figure. The girl couldn't take it anymore and splashed hot tea in one of the boys' faces. In unbearable pain, he doubled over, trying to fight off the burns that appeared on his face. Qianxia stood before him, and the boy couldn't understand what had made her act like that. Suddenly, she saw the photos on his phone. It was a naked photo of her dead friend that they had been sharing among themselves. She couldn't bear it and lunged at the guy, snatching the phone from him. She tried to escape, but the boys caught up with her and shoved her. Qianxia found herself on the ground. The boys surrounded her and tried to take her phone. She attempted to delete all the photos in his gallery to destroy the ones of her friend. She kept doing it even though the boys called security and all tried to take her phone together. One by one, the photos disappeared from his gallery. But it was very difficult to do so under those circumstances. And she, enduring incredible pain, tried to finish it quickly. Eventually, after a while, she succeeded. She didn't care that security was about to arrive, or that the boys continued to hit her. She was just glad that she managed to do something. Still, she handed them the phone and the boys left her alone. An ambulance and police were even called to the scene. But fortunately, the victim didn't file a report and the girl was simply sent home, told not to do anything like that again. She returned home hungry and utterly exhausted. She felt broken and couldn't believe that her best friend was dead because of her. She saw no other options and was ready to do the same. So, at that very moment, she headed to the rooftop. She stopped at the edge. Looking down, she realized the height was immense and even after falling, she wouldn't have any chance of surviving. However, for the sake of her friend, she was ready to take that step and was determined to do the same. Qianxia blamed herself for not being able to save her as she could have fixed everything. At that moment, she turned to God. The girl prayed for him to hear her and help her. She was ready to sacrifice everything and pay the highest price in exchange for one of her wishes. Suddenly, she heard an unfamiliar voice and sound behind her. It scared her greatly, and when she turned around, she saw no one. But looking up, she saw a boy with wings above her. The girl couldn't believe her eyes as an unknown man who looked like a demon appeared before her. Her prayers had been heard and he had descended to fulfill her wish and try to help. It was by Jiho, a true urban legend, as his photo hung on many signs and posters. In that moment, she recalled a story from her childhood about a demon that her mother had told her. It was a story about lovers who could never marry. But they were expecting a child and it was about to be born. With the birth of their child, their most cherished dreams would come true as they had waited so long for it. However, at the very last moment, the worst happened. The girl didn't survive to see the world. Losing hope, they asked the gods for help and that same demon descended to them. He introduced himself as a demon who was ready to grant any wish for a high price. But in exchange for the birth of the child, he wanted something of equal value. The couple, who were heartbroken and suffering after the death of their baby, agreed to such terms. As a result, the girl managed to get pregnant again. They had a very beautiful baby. But they had to pay a very high price as a deal with the devil, as it was known, could lead to nothing good. For the demon took away their bond and they could never be together again. Moreover, anyone could encounter the demon. He sought out his victims, those who desperately wanted something and had lost hope in life. And her mother warned the girl that she should never ask him for any wish as she risked losing much more than she could gain. At that moment, the demon descended before the girl and she couldn't understand how he had managed to find her. There was no doubt that it was him. The very same evil spirit that she had been told about in her childhood. She also recognized that he was the same guy who had almost gotten her beaten up by the girls. But she was very lucky as the first time they had only warned her and let her go. She began to blame him for her friend's death. After all, it was because of that photo with him that she hadn't been able to respond and save her life. But the boy seemed very surprised and didn't understand what she was talking about. Qianxia, filled with anger, lunged at him and tried to hit him. But at the last moment, something unexpected happened. The demon raised his hand before her. This caused the girl to lift into the air and hover there for a moment. The boy insisted that he only wanted to grant her wish and that she had called him to her. He also knew what she truly wanted and who she wanted to take revenge on. At that moment, Qianxia realized that he knew everything about her and that she couldn't hide anything. After all, he was the very same evil spirit that everyone talked about. She tried to calm down, realizing that he wasn't involved in her friend's death and had no intention of harming her. Moreover, she had no chance of fighting him. Suddenly, Bai Jiho magically drew the girl closer to him. She was so close that she could feel his breath, which had become ragged. The devil knew she craved revenge and wanted to uncover the true reason behind her intense anger. She told him about her friend and how horribly she had been treated, leading to her breakdown and suicide. She was convinced she had to find everyone involved in spreading her friend's photo and punish them all. She begged the demon to grant her wish, but he warned her that it would come at a very high price. Bai Jiho replied that the girl had nothing to offer him but her body, which didn't interest him at all. Therefore, he couldn't make a deal with her since she had nothing to pay him with. He was about to leave her alone on the rooftop. But the poor girl tried to make him stay, as it was her only chance to make things right. She was ready to give him her own life. However, she held no value for Bai Jiho. He needed much more. But in his 100 years of existence, she was the first to be willing to raise a hand against him. This delighted him greatly, despite the fact that nothing had come of it in Qianxia. So he turned back and announced that he was ready to grant her wish. After he touched her, everything in her vision began to fade and blur. She started to drift off to sleep. After a while, she lost consciousness. She found herself resting on the demon's chest. He held her, preventing her from falling onto the cold concrete. He was prepared to stay by her side and ensure nothing happened to her body. After all, when she woke up, her wish should be fulfilled. The next day, the heroine woke up in her own bed. However, she didn't understand how she got there and tried to recall everything. Suddenly, she remembered the demon and what she had seen the night before. But she began to doubt, thinking it must have been just a dream and that it hadn't really happened. After all, how could the famous demon Bai Jiho come to her? She tried to get out of bed, but felt terrible and hadn't slept at all. She also couldn't remember how she had fallen asleep or why she was still in her clothes. But when she looked at herself in the mirror, her eyes filled with fear. There was something strange on her neck. Upon closer inspection, she noticed a bite mark, resembling a vampire's. The girl began to remember what had actually happened to her and how it could have occurred. Her thoughts were interrupted by her phone ringing. Various notifications kept coming in, and she approached her phone to see who it was. It turned out to be alerts from the local news channel. They were reporting on the bankruptcy of a well-known company, and the news was simply unbelievable. The news also mentioned that thousands of people were left without jobs. Qianxia realized that the devil himself was likely behind this, and it could have happened because of her wish. After all, it was at that company where people had exchanged her friend's photos, leading to her tragic death. Suddenly, she heard a strange knocking behind her. It was coming from the window, and when she looked out, she saw the demon. Bai Jiho was in the body of an ordinary guy and had appeared to her just as she thought of him. He surveyed her apartment and concluded that it was too small. He also said that her wish had been granted, as those involved in her friend's death had been punished and their lives were ruined. However, the girl was not satisfied, as many innocent people had also suffered and lost their jobs, making the consequences truly horrific. She wanted Bai Jiho to fix everything using his magic and return things to how they were before. But for her new wish, she would again have to pay a very high price. This time, Qianxia thought less about herself and only worried about the innocent people who needed to fix their situation and find work. So she agreed to any terms for the sake of others' well-being. At that moment, her wish was granted. Time began to rewind. All the events that had occurred in the world were sent back to the past. Day turned into night, and everything started from the moment it all began. The clocks showed a completely different time. The news broadcast on the TV changed to yesterday's program. And when she checked her phone, the girl realized that all her messages had disappeared and the date had changed. Qianxia couldn't believe that the demon was so powerful and could manipulate time so easily. But there was nothing in the world that was beyond his capabilities. Realizing this, the girl wondered if he could bring her friend back to life. However, the boy didn't respond. He knew he couldn't help her with that. Even demons had their own laws that couldn't be broken. But Bai Jiho felt how deeply the girl was disappointed when he refused her. He also sensed that she had already made a wish, because despite everything in the world, she wanted to bring her friend back to life and was willing to pay with her own. The main character worked at a well-known company. Her office was in the same building from which her friend had jumped to her death. Returning to work, all she heard was talk about the suicide and how an unknown girl had jumped from the roof. In reality, time had only rewound 18 hours since her death. And it was very sad to hear and understand that even in such a short time, many had managed to get used to her absence and come to terms with her death. After all, it was just a topic of conversation on the way to work for many, and in reality, no one gave it much thought. As it turned out, May worked in the finance department, and the heroine came to her workplace to collect her things. But she couldn't even do that, because the janitor had already thrown her belongings in the trash. This news was a real shock for Qianxia. She couldn't believe that people could be so cruel and why they had tried to get rid of her things so quickly. After all, the girl had worked at the company for 3 long years and had done her job well. She tried to blame the director for such brazen behavior, but he explained that no one wanted to come to work and look at the belongings of a dead person. Moreover, the man didn't want to take responsibility for such an act and blamed the janitors. He said they did it without his knowledge, and there was nothing he could change. The girl was already ready to leave when suddenly, an unknown woman stopped her. It was Han Xinqian, the head of the finance department where the deceased had worked. Her words and sudden appearance made Qianxia pause. The director tried to apologize for her subordinate's behavior and said he had expressed himself very poorly. It seemed even she found it hard to believe that the girl's things could just be thrown away. But as it turned out, she had managed to save some items and all of her belongings remained inside the room they entered. Upon entering, the heroine saw a huge number of her friend's personal belongings. This was the most precious discovery for her, because as she glanced inside the box, she couldn't hold back her tears. There were all of May's personal items and things she had loved dearly. Qianxia mourned as she went through her things. More than anything in the world, she wished her friend were alive and by her side. It hurt her deeply that she had left her so easily and left behind such a mess for her to sort through. She even felt angry with her for her actions, as she was convinced that there was a way out of any situation. The photograph she found was especially significant to her, and she wanted to take it home. Meanwhile, Bai Jiho, in the body of a boy who was a true city star, was getting ready for a fashion show and having makeup applied to his face. He was very calm, and his makeup artist asked what had him so preoccupied. But the boy had no desire to talk to her. He simply asked if she had a close friend and if she would be willing to die for him. He understood that the girl's wish was something incredible and very few people would be willing to sacrifice their own lives to save another. The demon realized she was quite extraordinary and it wouldn't be so simple with her. After all, the demon knew all about her life and remembered every moment from her childhood. He was aware of her early years and how she met her friend who stood up for her in school. He also remembered their entire friendship that had lasted since then and how they had bonded. It all started with an argument and the girls accused each other of being crybabies and cowards. Their friendship continued even in high school. And even as adults, they didn't forget each other and kept in touch. He also recalled an incident from her life, because that event had been a turning point in her life and had forever changed the girls' destinies. Qianxia had run into the road due to her own carelessness, and the driver of the car wouldn't have had time to react. If it hadn't been for May, Qianxia would have died that day, because she had risked her own life, running into the road and pushing her away. She herself ended up under the wheels of the car and suffered terrible injuries. And that horrific event had not only shattered her impressive sports career. The next few days at work were very tough for the main character. She couldn't gather her thoughts or concentrate on the tasks at hand. Her coworkers constantly made remarks to her, and the HR deputy noticed that something was off with her. Luo Xingnan knew she was very close to the deceased girl, and it was clear she was grieving deeply. In fact, he also missed her greatly and wondered about May's close relationships. His curiosity frightened the heroine, as no one knew about her relationship, and it was a big secret. She pretended to know nothing as her friend's boyfriend didn't want to make their relationship public and it was a secret. Suddenly, Luo Xingnan replied that May had confessed her feelings to him last year and he regretted that nothing had come of it. He blamed himself for not reciprocating her feelings. The boy tried to make amends for his behavior and guilt as he had genuinely liked her at that moment and didn't understand why he hadn't responded in kind. And when the heroine turned away from him, he tried to stop her. He wanted to continue talking about May, knowing she had no relatives and that the heroine had taken on all the funeral expenses, so he was ready to help. But he failed to impress Qianxia and she remained completely cold towards him. Returning to work, she heard the buzz of the crowd and that they had spotted the city star. The heroine realized they were talking about the same guy and couldn't believe it was just a coincidence. After all, Bai Jiho had arrived at their office and many employees had left their workstations to see him. One of the women pulled her to the window to see the handsome young man for herself. Many people were devoted fans and would do anything to meet him in person. Seeing him in person, they couldn't believe someone could be so good-looking. They marveled at his beautiful physique and how athletic he was. But the heroine understood that his appearance was not just a coincidence. At that moment, he was working on her wish and trying to fulfill it. Suddenly, the boy looked up and noticed her. Qianxia thought that at that moment he wanted to say something to her. But he just smiled and continued to look at her. The girl began to realize that she was the one who had conspired with the devil for revenge. The demon's human form was a superstar who looked very young and attractive despite being over 1,000 years old. After the deal, he had told her 3 rules she needed to follow. One of them was about his name, and whenever she thought of him, he would appear immediately. For any request or favor, she would have to pay a high price and give something in return. The last rule was the worst, as she had only 3 months left to live. Still, the girl realized she might have rushed to conclusions and began to regret making a deal with him. Suddenly, her attention was drawn to the elevator, which had stopped on her floor. It became clear that it was the boy, and his appearance immediately attracted the attention of all the employees. When the elevator doors opened, it was clear that it was him along with his bodyguard. The man next to him was very serious, and his job was to keep anyone from getting too close to the boy. Suddenly, the demon snapped his fingers. Time seemed to freeze, and everyone around the girl came to a standstill too. She was terrified, unable to believe her own eyes and the bizarre situation unfolding before her. Bai Jiho simply wanted her to come closer to him. With no other choice, the girl obeyed his command and moved toward him. The scene around her was far more horrifying than anything she had ever witnessed. She hoped that this time freeze wouldn't somehow affect her life. And nothing happened to the people who were affected, they remained unharmed. She wanted to convince the demon to take his time and hold off on making her complete her tasks because she needed to gather enough information about her friend's tormentors. Soon, she was planning to start her search. She already knew about a person who had been spreading photos, and he was the one who had managed to gain the trust of the deceased. The first suspect was Han Xinqian, her boss, who always made her life difficult. The second could be a fat, unpleasant man who had thrown some of May's belongings in the trash. And lastly, there was that one guy she trusted the most and had opened up to about her feelings. But this information didn't impress the demon. It simply wasn't enough. Moreover, he leaned in so suddenly that it startled her. In reality, he understood that she was constantly thinking about him in the video of his presence, and she was the one drawing him closer. But it seemed the demon agreed with her about Luo Xingnan, because one could never trust men, especially attractive ones. He also noticed a strange detail in the main character's behavior that caught his attention. The fact was, she was very easy to scare, and anyone could take advantage of that. He believed she was worthy of being one of his people and wanted her to start working for him. Her goal was very noble, and he liked how devoted she was, willing to sacrifice her own life for her deceased friend. When he leaned in again, he kissed her. Inside her, everything ignited, and she felt a strong heat. Suddenly, everyone woke up, and even the detective could tell where the boy he was supposed to protect had gone. After the demon kissed the girl, he noticed that her appearance had changed. She was so flustered that she couldn't say a word. Bai Jiho kissed her, knowing she hadn't appreciated his bite on her neck, thinking this would please her much more. But it only made her angrier. After a while, the demon and the main character descended to the floor where it all began. The boy saw how flustered the girl was and ordered her to stay by his side, not to stray even a step away. Meanwhile, Qianxia, observing the crowd's reaction, couldn't understand why they adored him so much when he was just an ordinary demon. As he moved, the crowd cheered him on with applause and shouts. Additionally, the girl next to him caught their attention, and conversations about her began immediately. Many recognized her and realized she was their colleague from the company. They also recalled that she was the best friend of the deceased and probably knew how to charm handsome men. The demon, sensing the thoughts and conversations of the people, wondered how the girl could have tarnished her reputation and the opinions others had of her. So, all the surrounding thoughts were solely about her and how she managed to gain his trust. In reality, Qianxia was completely indifferent to the chatter behind her back. She understood that she had very little time left and needed to use it wisely. The boy had a business meeting with a company representative and asked the girl to buy him some candy, which she was planning to do at that moment. So, she approached the vending machine trying to get something for him. But she couldn't believe her eyes when she saw his picture even on the candy wrapper, showcasing the boy's popularity and status. Suddenly, she heard the creak of a door behind her. Turning around, she saw someone watching her through a small window. Seeing the unknown boy, she was extremely frightened. The boy, realizing he had given himself away, started to run. Still, curiosity overcame her fear, and the heroine dashed after him to find out who the suspicious man really was. She tried to shout at him and get him to stop, but he kept running. He was quickly descending the stairs. But the girl was much faster than him, so she easily caught up and grabbed his arm. The fugitive realized he was in a tight spot and that big trouble awaited him. The heroine scrutinized his expression, trying to understand who he really was, as the boy seemed very familiar to her. Suddenly, she recalled a story from her friend's life that was connected to him. After all, he was also an employee in her department and had crossed paths with her quite often. Moreover, she had seen him multiple times and knew he was from the finance department. There was no doubt he knew something about the circumstances of her death. But the boy didn't want to answer, believing that nothing could change now. His words struck Qianxia deeply, and she could no longer hold herself back. In that moment, she lunged at the boy, trying to extract any information he had that could shed light on Mei's death. She was ready to do anything to find out who had taken her photo and spread it among the group of employees, even if it cost her own life. But even after that, the man said nothing, feeling the threat emanating from her and unwilling to share anything. Realizing this, the girl calmed down and let him go. She understood that she shouldn't have resorted to such extreme measures since she had the demon's support. And in any case, the criminals would have to face justice. The boy was relieved when she released him. Now, she calmly repeated her question, wanting him to share everything, even if he thought it wasn't that important. According to him, it all started 3 years ago when Mei had just begun working at the company. He had liked her right away, and he had no hope that she would ever date him, so he had no choice but to watch her from afar all those years. He felt very upset when, after a while, Luo Xingnan appeared and managed to capture her attention, even winning her over. It seemed the girl was happy with him, but he never truly loved her and eventually broke her heart. He thought at first it was due to a lack of mutual feelings between them, but later realized there was another reason. She had a huge fight with her colleagues on her floor and was forced to go to the restroom on the floor below, which was something very unusual and strange. After all the events that happened in Mei's life, she suddenly decided to end her life, which was very odd. The heroine realized that the secret might be hidden in the restroom on the 12th floor, where she didn't want to go alone and had discouraged her colleagues from going there. Meanwhile, a meeting began in the large hall, attended by many influential representatives of the company. They were discussing the future of their business and trying to draft a detailed plan, but the boy was completely uninterested in their chatter. He couldn't stop thinking about Qianxia and how unusual her personality was. Suddenly, he felt her presence nearby. And indeed, he saw her next to his bodyguard. He witnessed their conversation and tried to understand what was really happening. So, he began to listen closely. As it turned out, the girl just wanted to give him the candy she had bought from the vending machine. She also mentioned that she had urgent business on the 12th floor and wanted to head there at that moment, having to skip an important meeting. The bodyguard listened to her and agreed to do everything as she requested. The boy was openly displeased that the girl was talking to his bodyguard. So, trying to intervene, he used his own power to force the bodyguard to silence. Suddenly, the man fell silent. He felt an incredible pain throughout his body. The bodyguard didn't understand what was happening and what could be causing it. But Qianxia, seeing the boy, realized it was because of him. She understood that he was just jealous of her talking to the bodyguard and didn't like that she was conversing with him. So she walked away and disappeared from his sight so that the man wouldn't suffer from the pain inflicted by the demon anymore. Bai Jiho even found her on social media and sent her a message. However, she ignored him there too. She simply read the message and didn't reply. The men involved in the meeting tried to get his attention, but he was so fixated on her that he didn't even hear their words or react. He was waiting for Qianxia to respond to him, and it seemed that was far more important to him than the fate of the company. Everyone in the room was looking at him, not understanding why he wasn't answering questions or participating in the discussion. Due to his behavior, the speaker felt awkward, thinking he had said something wrong. After a while, Bai Jiho managed to gather his thoughts. He was tired of the long conversations and expressed his desire to end the meeting. However, the men intended to cooperate with him and were ready to meet any of his conditions just to get the star to agree to collaborate. At that moment, he stated his conditions, wanting Qianxia to leave her department and become his assistant. However, his colleagues knew her and were convinced that she had no experience whatsoever. They wanted to find him someone much better and more experienced. Moreover, they considered her a novice, despite the fact that she had been working at the company for 3 years. But Bai Jiho only wanted her, and without her, he didn't want to sign the contract. Meanwhile, Qianxia managed to reach the 12th floor. Finding the same restroom, she checked to see if anyone was following her before entering. Once she was sure of her safety, she stepped inside. At first glance, she found nothing suspicious at all, and she couldn't understand what her friend had been running away from all this time. She also checked the room that was accessible only to women, but found nothing there either. Additionally, she thought her friend might have only been afraid of a hidden camera. So she began searching for it. Qianxia checked all the places where it could have been installed. She even checked the toilet paper dispenser, hoping to find something. But everything was in vain and she saw nothing suspicious. Suddenly, she realized there was one more stall she hadn't checked. Furthermore, she heard someone approaching her and quickly said goodbye to the bodyguard to avoid drawing attention. The girls who entered the restroom were annoyed by the constant repairs and decided to go down to the floor below to avoid waiting. Qianxia asked them if anyone had recently repaired the restroom doors, as she wanted to get on the trail of the criminal. As it turned out, unknown people with a set of tools had come to the restroom the previous evening. This happened right after May's death. The girl realized that all these events were very suspicious and thanked them for the valuable information. Because she had come to a conclusion that this could have happened just before the demon appeared. The heroine tried to find him, but he was nowhere to be seen. The only thing she saw was a pile of notifications on her phone from the boy. He wrote that he didn't plan to show up in front of her at every opportunity anymore. And for him to appear, she needed to call him Master Demon. That evening, the workday came to an end. The heroine stood by the emergency exit. She was supposed to meet the demon and wanted to tell him what she had managed to find. Suddenly, she saw him approaching her. This could mean that the person might come back to insert the memory card and continue recording the video. Moreover, it was clear that this was the work of a real creep since the camera was set up right in the women's restroom. However, Qianxia was convinced that it was too late to start searching, because if there had been a need, they would have replaced the memory card immediately, leaving the camera empty. Therefore, it could be concluded that someone else had found the camera and removed the flash drive with the recorded information. Just then, the girl heard someone approaching and quickly said goodbye to the guard to avoid drawing attention to herself. The girls who had come into the restroom were annoyed by the constant repairs and decided to head down to the floor below to avoid waiting. Qianxia asked them if anyone had recently worked on the restroom doors, as she wanted to get closer to tracking down the culprit. As it turned out, unknown people had come to the restroom with a set of tools the night before. This happened right after May's death. The girl realized that all these events were very suspicious and thanked them for the valuable information, because she had come to a conclusion that this could have happened just before the demon appeared. The heroine tried to find him, but he was nowhere to be found. The only thing she saw was a bunch of notifications on her phone from the guy. He wrote that he didn't plan to show up in front of her at every opportunity anymore. And for him to appear, she needed to call him her demon master. That evening, the workday had come to an end. The heroine stood by the emergency exit. She was supposed to meet the demon and wanted to tell him what she had managed to find out. Suddenly, she saw him starting to approach her. He was running a bit late since they had agreed to meet much earlier and she had to wait for him. Still, she let him in. The demon knew what she was thinking and what she wanted to talk about, but he couldn't understand why the girl was acting so strangely. Suddenly, she turned to him. Qianxia looked at him seductively, wanting him to tell her what was wrong with her. She smiled at him, calling him her master. A silence fell between them. The demon was very confused and didn't know how to react to such behavior. All the demon wanted at that moment was to bite her to death. But the girl ignored him and simply went to the bathroom, leading him along. Bai Jiho had no idea why she had brought him to the bathroom. He was so happy that he forgot about the camera and that she suspected him. Suddenly, she showed him the camera. Qianxia wasn't sure if that was the cause of her friend's death, but she was convinced it could be related. Moreover, she pointed out significant damage to the body and that there was no memory card inside. It was unclear who owned the camera and the demon needed to find out. After all, that person could provide answers to all the questions and might be involved in spreading May's photos. But the demon didn't understand how he would manage to find the culprit since they had no evidence besides the broken camera. Then, Qianxia pulled out her main weapon. She was convinced that the demon wouldn't be able to resist the candies he loved so much. So he had no choice but to agree to help her. Qianxia wanted him to relive the events of the past and see what happened with the camera and who had taken out the flash drive. But for that she needed to get a lot more candy to pay him back in some other way. Then Qianxia pulled down her shirt, exposing her collarbone. She promised him much more after he helped her. The demon couldn't resist her, so he had to agree to her terms. Suddenly, the demon began to transform. Flames ignited in his eyes. Qianxia couldn't believe how easily he could shift from one form to another. Bai Jiho wanted her to see his hidden camera. After all, he was going to fulfill her request in exchange for her body. The sky over the city changed. The moon turned red, a true blood color. And only one person in the whole world knew what was really happening. He calmly sat in his apartment, observing everything. He knew it was the work of the devil, and he had descended to earth once again. Or maybe it wasn't a person at all, as the wine glass in his hand floated. Meanwhile, everything was ready and the events shifted to the past. It was an ordinary morning at the company and most employees were working at their desks when suddenly a conference was announced. Everyone headed to the hall where it was supposed to take place. Suddenly, one of the employees became very frightened. She felt as if something had touched her body. But it was the demon who had accidentally brushed against her with his wing. He scared the woman so much that she didn't even want to go to the meeting, convinced she had seen a person with wings. Still, the demon understood that this way he would easily reveal himself, so he needed to transform into an ordinary person. After all, without wings and horns, it was much more convenient and he didn't attract attention. Soon, the conference was about to start and it was the perfect opportunity to sneak into the bathroom and check everything. Moreover, these were the last moments of the girl's life as she would die in a few minutes. She was still alive and was about to head to the bathroom to wash her hands. That day, her colleagues noticed that she looked quite troubled and was acting unusually. In reality, the demon was invisible and didn't have to worry about being noticed. He observed May and compared her to a heroine, concluding who was more attractive. He stopped in front of her and wanted to prevent her from passing. He informed her that Qianxia would be very upset about her death. But she just walked past him, not even hearing or suspecting that the demon himself could be watching her. After all, it was known that even the demon couldn't stop someone who had decided to die. He saw the girl start to climb the stairs. It was clear she was heading straight to the roof when suddenly someone called out to her. It was Han Xinqian who warned the girl that she should stick with her during the interview and not wander off. But Bai Jiho didn't know who that woman was. Yet he noticed she was acting very suspiciously. Moreover, the girl didn't want to listen to her and refused her offer. She looked very tired, so the director let her go and allowed her to rest. May continued on and kept climbing the stairs. Suddenly, she stopped again and turned to her boss. The guy standing between them at that moment was completely confused, trying to figure out what was happening. May was talking about some unknown people that her boss should definitely know. These words struck like thunder as the demon was very surprised, trying to decipher her thoughts. The director seemed to understand what she was talking about but tried to pretend she knew nothing. After all, if she hadn't hidden secrets from everyone else and had helped May from the start, the girl wouldn't have taken such a radical step and everything could have been changed. She could have found the strength to continue living and fighting. Han Xinqian became very nervous at her words. She tried to justify herself, but the girl accused her of nothing. She had long made her choice to leave her life and promised to remember her as a good person and a great leader. May's words deeply pierced the woman's heart. After all, she was the accomplice and was involved in spreading her photos. The girl didn't even notice when her boss returned from the bathroom holding a flash drive with hidden recordings. The director was flustered as she realized where the girl was actually going and what she intended to do with herself. There was no turning back, so she needed to come up with something urgently. Because when the investigation into her death began, Han Xinqian would definitely be interrogated and could be linked to the recordings. So she threw the flash drive into the gap between the stairs where any employee of her company could find it. The demon understood that people were much worse than their demons as they could do very bad things. He watched the clock, knowing that very soon the girl could die. Meanwhile, the boss stood by the window, watching what was about to happen very soon. Suddenly, terrified voices and cries for help echoed outside. Everyone was talking about a girl who had taken her own life by jumping off the roof of a high-rise building. The director began to tremble with fear, realizing that the person she had spoken to just minutes ago was dead. The demon saw chaos erupt inside the building as people rushed out of their offices onto the street. But suddenly, in the crowd, his attention was caught by a very strange man talking on the phone. As it turned out, the unknown person was reporting the girl's disappearance, indicating that he might have been following her. Meanwhile, the main heroine was already waiting for the demon, realizing he was delayed. She imagined various scenarios and could already believe that something had happened to him. Moreover, she couldn't shake off a strange feeling. After all, she constantly thought someone was watching her. And turning around, she saw that the demon could soon be standing right in front of her, and she attributed her strange feeling to exhaustion. When the guy appeared, he could barely stand. The girl had to catch him so he wouldn't fall to the ground. This scared her a lot as she didn't understand what terrible thing could have happened to the demon himself. He replied that he urgently needed to eat something sweet because his head was spinning and he had spent too much energy. The heroine understood he might be doing this on purpose but decided to stay by his side for a while longer. She also noticed that the demon was very cold. But the temperature of demons shouldn't be the same as that of humans, and for him it was normal. To avoid being noticed, they decided to go somewhere else to talk about it, leaving their guard at the entrance. They chose to have lunch at a nearby cafe. The guy ate nothing but sugar and sweets while the girl tried to get him to eat normal human food. However, he had a terrible allergy to it and the food could turn him into a horrific and bloodthirsty demon. Also, the demon no longer wanted the girl to call him her master as it now irritated him greatly. Qianxia found it strange that he ate so much sugar. But for him, it was the best source of energy that helped him recover faster from the time travel. As it turned out, all these manipulations with time were very exhausting for the demon. If he didn't stop in time, he risked getting stuck in the past forever and never returning. He was also trying to hint that he needed to be watched and the girl should have done that for him. He thought it might scare her a little, as she began to realize that this was something to be very cautious about. Also, she couldn't wait to talk about what he had managed to figure out. And he told her everything from the very beginning, every detail. Qianxia had many questions. She didn't understand how the director and all the unknown people he mentioned could be involved in her death. But there was no doubt that her director was the main figure in the story of her death and she needed to be made to talk. The main heroine promised to take care of that and wanted to try to gain her trust or extract some information about her friend. However, the demon was very tired and wanted to postpone everything to another day, as he didn't have the strength to travel through time again. The girl also felt very exhausted, so she headed home. Once inside, she sighed with relief, finally able to relax. She had no idea what would happen next, because when she entered the bathroom, she noticed that the faucet was running, and that meant someone was in the house. Suddenly, she froze. Behind her, behind the shower curtain, stood an unknown man. But the girl tried to keep herself together. She was terrified and her whole body was shaking. The heroine turned on the water. While it flowed, she had a little time to think about what to do next. Then she stepped out of the bathroom into the kitchen, trying not to show how scared she was. She realized she needed to act very carefully and to have some evidence. She turned on the recorder. Then she simulated a phone conversation, trying to convince the intruder in her apartment that she urgently needed to go outside. She hoped that this way she could escape her own apartment. But as soon as she was about to go down and open the door to the stairwell, she heard the intruder start to pursue her. He slammed the door right in front of her face. The slightest chance of salvation was forever lost, because the masked man stood right behind her. It seemed everything was lost, as the intruder grabbed the girl by her hair and pulled her back. Right to him. With all his might, he threw her to the floor, and her phone fell to the ground, nearly breaking. The phone, which was her only chance to call for help, was far under the couch and she couldn't reach it. Meanwhile, the intruder continued to drag her away further from the entrance. In despair, she tried to call for help, but she realized it was all in vain. The criminal began to cover her mouth, and when she didn't listen to him, he hit her. He kept hitting her until she calmed down, and the blows were so strong that blood appeared on her face. More than anything in the world, she wanted just one thing, for Bai Jiho to appear in her apartment at that moment. He was the only one who could help and save her. Meanwhile, the criminal who had been holding the girl all this time promised to let her go. But there was one condition: she couldn't scream. She agreed, as she could no longer endure the torment and the beatings. And as soon as he let her go, she screamed again very loudly. She was ready to give him everything, money, credit cards, jewelry, everything, just so he wouldn't touch her. But the man was only interested in her. He asked about some girl, and the heroine didn't understand who he was looking for. However, the stranger was certain that she knew who he was talking about, as he was aware that she had also been trying to find her. When she didn't respond, he got angry and lifted her up in front of him. He hit her again and threw her away from him. Then, he called someone and reported what had happened. Everything was under his control despite the fact that he hadn't managed to find anything. The heroine began to tremble again. She didn't know how it would all end. But then, the worst happened. The criminal took a photo of her best friend, and he approached her. He advised her not to get involved in her dead friend's case and not to try to find the culprits, because he promised that she would end up just like her and would be dead. After which, he started hitting her again. He didn't care that she was barely standing and remained conscious. Suddenly, she heard someone banging loudly on her door. And after a while, the guard kicked it in to get inside the house. When he saw the girl lying on the floor in terrible condition, he rushed to her and tried to help. Despite her head spinning, she managed to explain what had really happened. The guard had come because the demon had a very bad feeling, but he was too late. The thug had already escaped. Suddenly, the girl remembered her phone. It was still recording on the voice recorder. She had the most important thing, a 20-minute recording, and his voice was clearly captured. Just 15 minutes later, the police arrived at her house. They offered her a place to stay and promised to find the criminal who attacked her very soon. Seeing the photo of her friend, the officer suggested taking her to see her. But he didn't even realize what a terrible mistake he made by reminding her of her dead friend. At that moment, he called his boss, Bai Jiho. And when the guy heard what had happened to the girl, he ordered her to be brought to his house immediately. And she agreed. His house was very beautiful. It had everything, paintings of himself, fountains, exquisite furniture. The guy was very nervous about how long the girl had been gone. Moreover, he didn't know how seriously she was injured, as the scars on her face could be a problem. And he was frustrated that she hadn't texted him. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. He rushed to them and opened the door to see a frightened Xianxia. He immediately began to examine her and promised to take revenge on all her tormentors once he regained his strength. However, she assured him that she was fine. She continued to stand in the doorway of the house, and the guy invited her inside. But the guard stayed outside and the new one came inside the house, as he was supposed to protect it around the clock. The girl was impressed by the luxury of his house. That evening, she was supposed to sleep in the living room. She shouldn't have been afraid, as there were a huge number of his photos on the wall. However, she was convinced that she should return home. The demon suggested she take a hot bath to relax and calm down a bit. And then she remembered that he could read her thoughts when he was near her. She did as he said, as it was really what she needed. However, the horrifying thoughts wouldn't leave her. She thought about what had happened and tried to figure out the motives of the thief. Could that man have been threatening her friend too? How long had she lived in fear? What had she gone through, and how long could she endure it? However, her thoughts were interrupted by the demon, who asked how she was feeling. After all, she had been in the shower for a long time, without even realizing it. And the guy, having read her thoughts, promised to take revenge on all her tormentors. Then he calmly sat down to watch TV. Suddenly, the main character was looking for him. She came into his room, because she couldn't sleep in her own. Moreover, she was scared. She couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. Also, she couldn't sleep with the lights off and asked him to leave them on. She decided to tell him about the attack, and about how she wished Bai Jiho was there to protect her. She was angry because he was late and didn't come in time. Because just a little longer and she could have died. Her words made Bai Jiho think. He covered her up and wanted her to get some sleep. After all, it could calm her down since she was very frightened. It seemed to work. She fell asleep. To avoid waking her, the guy tried to quietly get up. He was going to go to another room but stopped in front of her. The demon looked at her carefully. She was very strange and at the same time, a strong girl. Moreover, she wasn't afraid of him at all, despite the fact that he was a demon. After all, in a little while, she would have to give him her own life. In the face of death, many people tried to break their contracts and fool him. They were willing to pay any price to stay alive. This happened constantly. For thousands of years, people tried to escape death. But no matter what, the ending was always the same for everyone. The demon was just doing his job and people found him themselves. It was very interesting how the girl would meet her own death. In her dream, the girl heard someone calling her. However, she couldn't move at all. The scariest part was that she couldn't feel her own body. But she understood everything and felt herself being pulled in. Thousands of hands were holding her, but she heard her friend's voice calling for help. This made her put in all her effort to rise. And she tried to break free to find her friend and save her. This time, even in her dreams, she had to save her. But she couldn't. May was leaving her again. Suddenly, she woke up drenched in cold sweat. She didn't immediately understand where she was and how she got there. But she couldn't shake off the nightmare she had just experienced. And it took her some time to collect herself. Suddenly, her attention was drawn to the demon sitting in front of her. His horns and ears had grown back, which indicated that he had used his magic again. However, he didn't react to her, and the girl realized that he was asleep and had stayed to guard her. She thanked him and wanted to treat him to some sweets. But she realized that he was sleeping. She needed to be very careful not to wake him. She covered him up. It was very strange that he was a demon and she, an ordinary person, wasn't afraid of him at all. As she looked around his house, she was amazed. There was so much modern technology. It was odd that a demon who had lived for so many years had furnished his house with new tech. She hoped to find many relics from the past in the house. Suddenly, a strange book caught her attention. This book was a photo album and she couldn't wait to look through its pages. It depicted the demon in his past lives. All the people were very famous and influential figures. Moreover, it became clear that the demon could transform himself into a woman. She also saw him in the body of a small child and it was very cute. However, one intriguing detail wouldn't leave her mind. Because in all the photos, he was depicted alone and didn't have a partner. Suddenly, the demon woke up and noticed that the girl was no longer sleeping and was looking through his album. He could change his appearance and she had one question for him. She was curious if he was the only demon in the world. But the guy got very angry at her. He didn't like that she was touching his personal belongings without permission. The girl, to fix the situation, planned to treat him to sweets. For this, she took him to the pastry shop where she worked and could go into the kitchen to prepare any sweets he wanted. However, suddenly, she realized the pastry shop in the demon's house wasn't a coincidence. Because, as it turned out, it belonged to him. And this made her even happier. Bai Jiho was very rich, as he owned several businesses in the city. That same evening, his pastry shop was bustling with activity. The guy acted as if he had never been in a pastry shop before. He didn't even know what was happening at his own business and the girl had to explain it to him. She considered him her special guest and wanted to serve him in a special way. So, she playfully winked at him. He was a special client for her. But the guy was so hungry that he started to stare at her. He was waiting for her to feed him. Bai Jiho asked if she regretted giving up her life for revenge. But the girl didn't regret giving her life to the demon. She also had a question for him. She was only interested in one thing: would she be able to meet her friend after death? After a long pause, the demon said it was possible. But he lied. Bai Jiho was full. The girl had fed him the best desserts she could prepare. He liked them so much that he asked her to make them again. But that day she was busy as May's funeral was to take place. The demon wanted to go with her. But after a while, the guard was already holding him back, not letting him go with the girl. He was worried that someone might attack her again and wanted to be nearby to protect her. He almost managed to convince his guard and the guard was ready to let him go. But the girl wasn't listening to him and didn't want him to go with her. So she simply said goodbye to him. And she was set to head to the funeral. But before saying goodbye, she spoke with his bodyguard. She handed him some sweets for Bai Jiho, which he could eat again when he got tired. But the demon, who had been watching all of this, began to fume. Those sweets belonged to him. Yet, no matter how much she wished he would come with her, she could only be there alone. Meanwhile, people had already started to gather in the funeral hall. The girl was there too. Sitting inside was one person. May's mother. The old woman had long been able to foresee her daughter's death. After all, she understood better than anyone that something was seriously wrong with her daughter. Seeing the heroine, she was overjoyed and called her over. Qianxia saw how hard it was for the old woman and rushed to her feet. She begged for forgiveness, believing herself to be responsible for her death and for not being able to save her. But Grandma didn't know the real reason for her death. They hadn't told her due to her weak heart. She simply wouldn't have survived if she found out that her daughter had taken her own life. The woman had already begun to accept that she was alone. She tried to comfort the heroine. After all, she insisted that they couldn't keep crying as it was impossible to change anything now. Xianxia felt ashamed of her tears, realizing how the grandmother felt and that it was much harder for her. Suddenly, other people entered the hall, among them was director Han Xinxian. She brought flowers to the girl's grave. It seemed she was mourning too, but the heroine immediately sensed something strange about her behavior. Then, Han Xinxian approached Grandma and expressed her condolences, offering her money, which the woman refused. Just then, the main character interrupted their conversation. She wanted to talk to her, so they stepped outside. Han Xinxian was calm until a certain point. The heroine knew about the memory card from the camera and that it was with the director. After those words, Han Xinxian realized just how deep in trouble she really was. After all, she didn't understand how the girl could know about it. At that moment, she pretended to know nothing. Qianxia showed her the wound, explained about the camera, and how she had been attacked in the middle of the night. She didn't believe the director's words and tried to convince her to hand over the flash drive as the same could happen to her. Qianxia just wanted to know the truth and find those responsible. After all, she had a very noble goal. She didn't want anyone else to end up in her friend's place. She couldn't bear the thought of other girls suffering at the hands of predators. However, Han Xinxian wouldn't listen to her. She simply turned and walked away, leaving her alone. Qianxia tried to stop her, knowing the woman definitely knew something. But again, she didn't respond. It didn't matter to her. After the meeting, there were still many questions that needed answers. Along with the director, the girl's colleagues came to the funeral. They talked about May and how wonderful a person she was. For them, her death was also a complete shock. Moreover, they were witnesses to those photos and were discussing all the details that were in the pictures at that moment. They also couldn't understand why she had decided to take her own life. They were convinced that if her mother found out the real reason for her daughter's death, she would go mad. After that, she simply wouldn't be able to live peacefully. They continued discussing the girl's death and the details of the photos. They didn't even notice that her mother was right next to them. She overheard their conversation and couldn't believe her ears and everything they were saying about her child. But it was clear that her girl's death was no accident. The men realized they had said way too much and tried to calm her down, insisting it was all just rumors. However, it was already too late to try to fix anything. And the men felt very ashamed that it was because of them that Grandma learned the truth. The grief-stricken woman began to tremble. She threw herself at May's grave. Falling to her knees before it, she cried uncontrollably. Suddenly, the main heroine heard her voice. She immediately ran into the funeral hall. Seeing the woman lying on the ground, sobbing bitterly, she rushed to her. Meanwhile, Han Xinxian was trying to figure out what had really happened. The grandmother's tears and how she suffered. The main heroine would never be able to forget. After all, that image was very painful for her. Han Xinxian understood what her actions had led to and sent her guys home, deciding to stay herself. Even after some time, Grandma couldn't calm down and collect herself. She didn't get up but continued to sit on the ground with her daughter's photo. Qianxia tried to comfort her, but the woman's grief was much stronger than her words. After all, Grandma understood that she hadn't been able to help her and hadn't seen how much she had suffered. She couldn't even imagine the horrors that could have happened and how terribly she could have been treated. She regretted spending so little time with her and visiting so rarely. She kept crying, and it seemed her heart wouldn't withstand it. Qianxia would never be able to forgive those responsible and promised to find them and make them pay. She decided to take revenge no matter what. All those guilty would face harsh punishment. She sat by Grandma and tried to comfort her. Qianxia understood that sooner or later it would get easier for her. She was able to leave only 2 hours later, once she was sure Grandma was feeling better. But as she was exiting the building, she saw the director waiting for her. It was very strange that she had stayed, but she decided to tell her the whole truth and warned her that it could be very painful. Qianxia promised that she could handle it and was ready to listen. As it turned out, her friend wasn't the only victim. She simply couldn't endure the torment and took such a step. In fact, Han Xinxian was one of the first victims, and she was going to share her story. It all started a long time ago, 7 years ago, when she, as a young student, came to work at the company. Despite her slim chances of getting the job, she was hired and offered a good position. At first, she was full of determination and performed her job perfectly. But later, she realized that the talk of fairness was just a lie. Her work wasn't appreciated properly and the girl felt used. She tried to address the issue with the director, who didn't react at all to her words. Moreover, he even allowed himself to mock her. All her pleas and attempts to explain led nowhere. And each time, she returned empty-handed. Working at the company was very hard, and along the way, she encountered many problems and troubles. Her colleagues wouldn't leave her alone. She worked very hard, trying to achieve her goal and gain respect in the company. Eventually, her problems boiled over one day. She began to drown in the injustice of her own life. Because she didn't want to be like everyone else, she suffered greatly. She didn't want to please anyone and listened only to her inner voice, which played a cruel joke on her, because she could no longer fight. And at that moment, when hope was gone, she made a choice. She trusted one person. Their new director was particularly attentive to her, and she met with him quite often. One of those meetings took place late at a hotel after work. The director showered her with gifts. It seemed this step could help her become much more successful. But she tried to act modestly and didn't just accept his gifts. She thought she was starting to fall in love and couldn't live without him. But one day changed everything forever. She heard constant notifications coming to his phone. She was convinced they were just regular work notifications. However, there were so many that it wouldn't let her rest. Unlocking the phone, she realized that the subject of his emails was her name. It was very strange, and she couldn't hold back and decided to take a look. She tried to guess his password and remembered the numbers of his car, which were his lucky numbers. So she decided to give it a shot. On her first try, she succeeded and access to the email was in her hands. Then what happened changed her life forever. The man was selling her naked photos to various people. He had taken pictures of her while she was sleeping and completely unaware. There were even videos. She horrifiedly went through hundreds of emails from his clients who were buying materials featuring her. Suddenly, the man himself walked out of the shower. He suspected nothing, and when he saw her crying, he wanted to comfort her. But everything was ruined. The illusion in which the girl had lived for so long was shattered. The worst part was that the email account belonged to the company she worked for, and all the materials from there immediately went to a VIP group. Moreover, every month he received money for the photos and videos of her. And one month he managed to sell photos for $1,700, which was very little. So he decided that everyone was tired of her and sent a bunch of complaints about her to his clients. The girls were just products for those men. That was when she learned the horrifying truth about the company and that it was trafficking girls and their photos. To gain membership in the group, certain conditions had to be met. Sending a specific number of photos and videos, all materials were paid. It was very strange why, after that humiliation, she continued to work at the company. But she simply had no choice as she was being blackmailed. The woman tried to protect herself and thought about her own life, so she had to endure constant torment. She couldn't leave the job and position she had worked so hard for over the years. She simply didn't consider herself guilty of the fact that human trafficking continued. The woman was just trying to survive with all her might and was trying to fight against the evil she had encountered. Her story deeply moved the heroine. The rain began to fall. She hugged the woman and held on for a long time. She was grateful to her for sharing everything. The girl couldn't imagine how the woman managed to endure all the trials in her life. How she could continue working at the company despite the gazes of those perverts who were also there. Choosing her own life didn't mean making a mistake. And she was thankful that she opened up and was able to share everything. The girl promised to help her, but she needed a bodyguard. After all, he was the man she could rely on. He was strong, resilient, and brave. But in reality, that assistant was supposed to be Bai Jiho. The demon had already regained his strength and was ready to continue working. However, their company didn't inspire much trust in the director, because she couldn't imagine how they planned to fight against an entire organization dedicated to trading photos. But first, they needed to learn everything about the secret organization. And the woman shared everything she knew. Their company had a secret chat, like a hidden group. The group had 300 members, and getting in was very difficult since certain conditions had to be met. To start, one had to post a specific number of photos and videos. Moreover, videos could only be uploaded within the group and its members were anonymous. The group members were arrogant, wealthy individuals who didn't care about the lives of others. However, it was unclear how May's photos could have spread to everyone else. Maybe she was bothering someone enough that it was just a bad joke? It was definitely unclear how the system in the group worked. However, it was crucial to find out the group's email, and the demon hoped the woman could remember it. The only clue she had was a memory card. She found it in the bathroom in one of the stalls they had installed. However, she hadn't personally seen those recordings and had tried to destroy them. The card was hidden in her office, and she was ready to hand it over to the people so they could stop the horror that had been happening for years. A guard was supposed to accompany her. He was responsible for her safety. In her office, the woman was trying to find the card she had carefully hidden. However, the guard wasn't allowed inside and waited for her in the hallway. She was in a hurry. But soon, the flash drive with the recordings was in her hands. Suddenly, she heard a noise inside the office. There was an unknown man in a suit sitting there. She hadn't even noticed him. He was also trying to find the flash drive, but to no avail. The woman realized that the man in front of her was not just an ordinary company employee. He was one of the main players. She had been gone for quite a while, and the guard was starting to get worried. Moreover, she wasn't responding and he was forced to go inside. But she and the suspicious man had vanished and there was no one left in the room. For a long time, the girl couldn't collect herself and cope with the stress she had just experienced. Whenever notifications came through on her phone, she jumped in fright. Suddenly, she received a call. It was work-related and they informed her that there would be some changes to her schedule. Also, she was to become the assistant to a guy, which meant she had a lot more responsibilities now. At the same time, his guard called him. He delivered some very tragic news. It turned out that Han Xinqian had disappeared and no one knew where she was. After a while, the girl was in a taxi with him heading to the office. She was very anxious, realizing that she could end up experiencing the same fate as Han. Evil people could kill her while trying to find information on the flash drive that belonged to her. She tried not to think about the worst-case scenario, but she understood that the woman could be suffering. The detective had already searched the entire room for any traces of her and was very pleased to see that people had arrived so quickly. He explained what had happened, that the woman had gone to her office looking for the flash drive, after which she disappeared. And it was unclear how she managed to leave the premises since he had been standing by the door the whole time. The demon was about to enter the room and wanted to check everything. He planned to use his magical power to turn back time even though he hadn't fully recovered yet. It was crucial to find her because she knew valuable information. She could lead them to the criminals. There was no time to waste, as with every passing minute, Han Xinqian's death drew closer, because it was unknown where she was. And immediately, the demon began to transform into his true form. Everything around him trembled. His eyes darkened and his pupils dilated. Everything turned red. And finally he succeeded as he saw Han Xinqian before him. She looked very frightened as it was the exact moment she encountered the stranger in her room. But the demon couldn't hear a single word from Han Xinqian. Yet it was clear that she wasn't alone and was talking to someone. He wanted to expend even more of his power just to understand what was really happening. He saw the woman again and how she tried to scream in fear. However, he could no longer hold on, as all his strength was depleted. He learned nothing. What he managed to see was too little to understand everything. It felt like someone was obstructing him, and there was an invisible barrier in the room. It blocked his powers and senses, and now it seemed the situation might reach a dead end. While they were trying to figure out what was happening, unknown people kidnapped Han Xinqian. They took her to a well-guarded location. It was a private clinic. It belonged to one of the kidnappers, and the woman was his VIP client, for whom he ordered a separate room to be prepared. The room was to be unusual, a place reserved for only valuable and special individuals. Moreover, the nurses bowed to their boss and were terrified. When everything was ready, they brought Han Xinqian inside. She could barely breathe and remembered nothing. The orderlies constantly hovered over her and didn't leave her side. They had to ensure she didn't get worse and needed to help her recover after the beatings and abuse. The nurses were scared that the VIP client was in such a bad state and couldn't regain consciousness for a long time. However, she spoke very quietly, fearing that someone might hear them. Still, when the woman came to, she talked about some demon, and because of that they thought she was out of her mind. Suddenly they noticed someone approaching. It was the head nurse who had overheard their conversation. She didn't like that the women were talking about VIP clients. After all, according to the hospital's rules, that was not allowed. She threatened to fire them and they promised not to speak of it again. It was clear that this was not an ordinary hospital. Influential people kept everything under their control and could intimidate regular staff. A few days later, the girl decided to visit her friend's house. After all, she had the keys to her place. Upon entering, she saw how neglected everything was. The place brought back a flood of memories, and she began to feel nostalgic. All the events in her life were connected to Mei. She remembered how they cooked together, how they would watch movies and spend tons of time together. She often visited her and stayed overnight. The heroine remembered how she would fall asleep, and how she tried to warn her, telling her that her boyfriend wasn't as good as he seemed, because Luo Xingnan might not be who he claimed to be. But she had another goal and wanted to carefully search her apartment to try to find some evidence. She was also in contact with the demon. She told him where she was and what she wanted to do. She carefully looked around, searching for anything suspicious. Her attention was drawn to a shelf of books as there could be some valuable information or letters there. And suddenly, in one of the books, she found an unclear note. It was instructions on how to take birth control pills. She started searching further, trying to find those very pills, as she suspected her boyfriend might have brought them, and they could be some kind of drug. She also rummaged through her clothes. She was attentive to every detail but realized that someone had already searched the place. So she decided to call Luo Xingnan. After all, he was one of the suspects. She wanted to meet him and discuss everything. She set a meeting place. The girl wanted him to come to her friend's house. However, he couldn't make it and she decided to go in his place. She found a button and was convinced it belonged to Luo Xingnan. After all, she knew how much he liked her friend and often visited her. She truly loved him, while he might have just been using her, because lately he had been treating her very rudely and could just disappear. It seemed he was the kind of guy involved in spreading her photos. And the main character was trying to figure it out. When Luo Xingnan arrived at the meeting spot, he was waiting for the heroine. He tried calling her when she didn't show up for a long time. But at that moment she was at the police station. She wanted the police to help her expose him. Luo Xingnan was about to head up to her apartment and was trying to find out the house number. Soon, they were supposed to meet. They were watching him on the surveillance cameras, and the girl hoped the guards had seen him earlier. But it was all in vain, and no one recognized him. After all, they knew all the residents of the building, and they had never seen that man before. However, there was a night guard who might have seen him at night. Suddenly, an old man walked into the room and stood right in front of her at that moment. For the girl, it was a real stroke of luck to meet him then. The man closely examined the image and tried to recognize Luo Xingnan. But he only saw him from behind and was trying to make out his face. Meanwhile, the guy had already made it to her apartment and was standing at the door trying to call her. Suddenly, she came out to him, making him nervous. Moreover, she wasn't alone, because behind her stood the same guard who had been trying to recognize him. Seeing the old man, Luo Xingnan noticeably started to panic as the man recognized him. He knew that Luo Xingnan was Mei's boyfriend and hadn't been seen in the building for a long time. This made Luo Xingnan even more anxious. However, the girl thanked the guard and told him he could leave. And he left, leaving them alone. Suddenly, the girl handed him the button. Immediately, Luo Xingnan began to insist that the item didn't belong to him and that she was mistaken. He didn't even look at her, and that raised some suspicions. He was about to leave when suddenly Qianxia stopped him. The guy turned sharply to her, not understanding her behavior, and he only saw her looking at him seriously. Suddenly, a demon began to appear behind him. His appearance frightened the guy immensely, and he froze, unable to move. She wanted the demon to deal with the man and make him talk. Luo Xingnan tried to escape, but the people blocked his way. They wanted to extract information from him and find out if he was involved in the girl's death. Luo Xingnan vehemently denied his guilt and insisted he knew nothing, but the girl was willing to pay any price just to have the demon uncover the truth. And in that moment he began to transform. Seeing this, the guy bolted. But it was too late, the demon caught up with him. He ripped out his heart and Luo Xingnan tried to save himself, calling for help. But it was far too late, he was dead and with him died the heroine's hope of learning anything. She realized that to find out the truth an incredibly high price would have to be paid. But in reality, the demon wouldn't have let him die. It was just a way to extract information and keep him close. He saw what was happening at that very moment, but in another place. Two people were making love. Suddenly, the man stopped. This made the woman panic. The demon wanted the girl to approach him. He touched her. Suddenly, she began to see the same things he saw. She saw her friend at the moment she met Luo Xingnan. She also remembered when she first started working at the company and met him. At first, he seemed very friendly and she thought he even liked her. She saw how his relationship with his girlfriend developed, and how he turned her down because she could have hindered his career. His rejection shattered May's heart as he was the first guy she had liked. She also witnessed the events of one terrible night. That was when her friend's photos started circulating in the group, and anyone could see them. She went to his house even though it was very late and pouring rain. She thought he was involved in what had happened. Her photos were everywhere, easily downloadable in the VIP group. She was also being blackmailed, and she yelled at him, thinking he was guilty, because he was the only one she could trust and open up to after all those years. And the guy replied that she should just accept what had happened because she wasn't the only one whose photos were being shared. At that moment, he decided to break up with her. After that day, he tried to talk to her and wanted to regain her trust and love. He denied his guilt and insisted that she would never find any evidence against him or learn the truth. He also didn't want her blaming him. His conscience began to torment him. And the most interesting part was that a security guard witnessed their arguments and understood everything. The guy truly couldn't do anything and was forced to send her photos, because his career and job at the company, for which he had worked for many years, depended on it. Moreover, other men were sending them for him directly from his phone. Nothing depended on him, even though he desperately wanted to change everything. If only he could turn back time, he would do it. But with each new photo sent, his position in the company grew and he couldn't control himself. He felt guilty because he understood how much she loved him. It hurt him especially to read her messages, because she didn't even want to see him or know him, and any attempts to reconcile were in vain. When everything was ready, the demon released him. The guy survived, but he didn't understand what had happened to him. That was all he could learn, and there was no point in continuing. Xianxia cried because she couldn't believe the guy could do that to her friend who loved him so much. She also couldn't understand who that man was that he was subservient to, because he was behind all the crimes happening within the company, and it seemed like it would never end. Bai Jiho faced the same problem as he still couldn't see the face of the guy who was in charge. His powers didn't work on him. Meanwhile, the girl rushed to the victim and tried to ask him for information. She wanted to know everything about the mastermind and how he managed to make the guy send her photos. That man could handle any problem within the company and was responsible for dealing with files and documents. He was in charge of the company's entire security. Bai Jiho hoped that with the help of the guy, he could meet him. This would give him an understanding of who that man really was and how he earned such authority. Also, to check if the guy was telling the truth, he touched him and read his thoughts. He also managed to erase his memories as the demon wanted him to tell someone about him. Suddenly, when everything was ready, the guy fell asleep. And when he woke up, he wouldn't remember anything. The girl could no longer bear everything that was happening, because she understood that she had very little time left and might not manage to find the culprit and punish him. She had already done everything she could, and the demon tried to calm her down. The girl desperately wanted to punish everyone responsible and not stop at just him, because many innocent girls continued to suffer who didn't suspect anything and were as naive as her friend. She wasn't worried about the high price she would have to pay for this and was ready to do anything to save them. She felt guilty for her friend's death, so she couldn't back down. It was already too late. All she wanted was to meet her again after death and never part again. She believed that this would help her friend find peace in the afterlife. And there, she wouldn't suffer or feel guilty. The girl just wanted to help her as she had done in her own childhood. The demon sensed that she was very tired, so he decided to put her to sleep just like he did with the guy, and she fell asleep. At the same time, he was preparing to punish Luo Xingnan. Meanwhile, the scene shifted to the house of an unknown man. Next to him was a girl who was also one of his victims. He stopped talking to her and completely ignored her. This frightened the girl greatly as his behavior had changed. He became unpredictable and suddenly seemed ready to kick her out of his place. He also informed her that she could no longer call him. The woman began to suspect that something was wrong with him because the man started yelling at her. Furthermore, she tried to eavesdrop on his phone conversation, and when he noticed this, he became furious with the woman. But when the woman got dressed, she tried to make amends. But it was too late to try to fix anything, because the man wasn't listening to her. He began to threaten her. And then, she realized who he might really be. Meanwhile, the heroine was peacefully sleeping in the demon's house. She was once again tormented by nightmares. Suddenly, she woke up as her dead friend appeared in her dream again. She also remembered almost nothing and didn't understand how she ended up in his house. She had slept for a long time and realized she was very tired. Bai Jiho wanted to give her some time to rest and regain her strength. He prepared a delicious meal for her and tried to do everything to distract her from bad thoughts. But she was only worried about Luo Xingnan and what the demon had done to him. He assured her that he had left him there and she shouldn't worry. But the girl hoped for a harsh punishment and was upset with the demon for his actions. She didn't even listen, but he tried to explain to her. He didn't want her to be troubled and tried to calm her down, because he felt everything and understood. Moreover, he was very good at distinguishing fear and knew when she was truly scared. Meanwhile, Luo Xingnan began to wake up. He didn't understand where he was and how he ended up in an unfamiliar apartment. But looking around, he realized he was in Mei's house. He tried to get out of there and ran to the door that led outside. Suddenly, the front door opened and he saw an unknown woman who lived in that apartment after the girl. Her appearance terrified him greatly, and he started to run. The guy couldn't believe that everything was happening for real and thought it was just a bad dream. All he could think about was how to leave the house as quickly as possible and never come back. But when the elevator arrived and the doors opened, he was so scared he couldn't move, because he saw Mei standing there with another guy. But the girl didn't want to talk to them and they didn't even exit the elevator with the man. In reality, it was just an illusion, and in place of Mei was an ordinary resident of that building. Luo Xingnan thought it was all a game and the heroine had just managed to find people who looked like her. However, when he stepped outside, everything changed. Because all around him, he saw only her face. Everyone looking at him resembled her. This began to drive him insane, and he started to run, trying to hide. But she was everywhere, and it became clear that this was his punishment. Realizing this, the heroine was able to calm down. It was much better than death, because he was doomed to suffer for the rest of his days. She was grateful to the demon for what he had done for her, and to repay him, she allowed him to bite her, because she understood that he needed to regain his strength. This was primarily so he could continue searching for the guilty. But at that moment, the demon hesitated. He felt an incredible pity for her, but he couldn't break the rules. He warned her that it would hurt this time. But the girl was ready to endure for the sake of finding and punishing everyone responsible as quickly as possible. And the demon did it. He bit her and blood flowed down her neck. The scene shifted to the house of an unknown man. He was peacefully sleeping in his own bed. Suddenly, the front door opened. A handsome man in a blue suit walked in. He looked at the man who continued to sleep, not even hearing him enter. He found his clothes. He threw them at him to wake him up. The guy woke up but didn't seem happy. He didn't understand what the man wanted from him so early. The man in blue turned on the news. It was about a murder at a famous hotel in the city. The woman's body was found on her knees with no blood, and a sexual act had been recorded before her death. Moreover, the hotel provided no information about its guests. The guy in blue immediately thought he was responsible for her death. And as it turned out, he really was, and he considered his murder a work of art. Those words only made him angrier. Throwing down the remote, he accused him of being irresponsible. You couldn't just cross the line and kill people as easily as that man did. To solve the problem, it would take a lot of time and effort. Suddenly, the stranger changed. He lunged at the man who had approached him. After all, it was thanks to him that he had money and could use it for his own purposes. He wouldn't admit his guilt, and could do whatever he wanted without facing consequences. After a while, he left his apartment, and he couldn't resolve anything. He couldn't influence the rich guy who also had a special power. Besides, he had heard rumors about one of the women's affairs. To divert attention from the murder, a new, even more horrifying event needed to be created. Meanwhile, the main heroine was trying to teach Bai Jiho how to cook. He listened carefully and tried to follow her instructions. However, instead of a delicious soup, he ended up with something really stinky. Moreover, it was an odd color, but he was satisfied. When the girl realized what he was doing, she nearly fainted. She couldn't bear to look at the food he had made and thought she might die from it. But the guy was trying so hard for her, and he was really upset when she criticized him. She yelled at him, and he tried to calm her down. Suddenly, she noticed that her phone was constantly buzzing with strange notifications. They were from a group chat, and the main topic of discussion was an unknown girl and the guy she was seen with. As it turned out, there were rumors that the guy was gay. Plus, there were a lot of photos, in which his face was clearly visible. What could all this mean? Was the guy only with the girl to hide his orientation? Moreover, his face looked very familiar to Qianxia. She was convinced she had seen him before and it seemed she recognized him. 20 years ago, Wan Yenming founded a well-known trading company. It took him just 6 years, and he built a real trading empire. He was a genius, as what he achieved in business was simply impossible. But despite this, most of his family praised not him, but his sons. Wan Zihao, his eldest son, had been under control since childhood and received a lot of attention. Because of this, he was meant to be the direct heir to his father's business. In contrast, the life of his younger brother Wan Zijia was shrouded in mystery. He wasn't as popular as his older brother, and society knew almost nothing about him. As it turned out, Wan Zihao was that very eldest son, and at that moment he was reading news about the hotel investigation being completed. Suddenly, he heard someone enter his office. As it turned out, it was his younger brother. He wanted to talk. In fact, news had surfaced online about Wan Zijia's affair, and he thought it was his brother's doing. After all, he was the one who organized the meeting that was in the news photo, while Wan Zijia didn't even know the girl. But Wan Zihao insisted it was just gossip and he shouldn't pay attention to such trivial matters. Moreover, the younger brother was worried about his brother's behavior and how he treated him. Wan Zihao reassured him that everything was fine. He didn't need to worry, as according to him, his help wasn't necessary. Besides, Wan Zihao even joked about the news regarding the affair. However, Wan Zijia really did have feelings for another girl, but he didn't want to share that information with his own brother. He met her while interning at a company. However, he didn't want to talk about her anymore. After all, his brother could find any information about anyone, and he really didn't want that. Also, his older brother had many secrets he was hiding, and that also made the guy stay silent, as he didn't trust him. Soon after, his older brother tried to find information and wanted to check who he had gotten closest to during his internship. Moreover, this had to stay between them and no one else should find out. Meanwhile, the main heroine was stuck at work. She was transferred to a new department and was trying to refuse her boss, who wouldn't let her go. He couldn't understand how she could become Demon's assistant so quickly and what she had done to achieve that. Moreover, it was very strange that he had turned down all the experienced workers and chose her instead. And the girl was convinced he just wanted to support her, but in reality he needed her life. Her new duties included ensuring the guy had constant support and doing everything to help him perform well at conferences. The conferences happened once a year, and it depended on her whether they would be successful. She also had to constantly monitor the guy's appearance and maintain order. However, that wasn't all. As it turned out, Han Xinxian hadn't been seen for a long time and had taken a very long leave. Qianxia realized that someone else could have requested the leave for her, as the woman physically couldn't do it. But according to her boss, she had sent a letter herself requesting the leave. Qianxia had a lot of questions. Who could be involved in this? Qianxia couldn't calm down for a long time after her conversation with her. She thought about the person who could treat the director so cruelly and send a letter in her name. Suddenly, she noticed that other people were starting to recognize her. After all, she was the very girl from the scandalous news about the city star by Jiho. But she didn't pay attention to that. She was only worried about Han Xinxian's fate and how she felt. Suddenly, she noticed someone approaching her. It was girls she didn't know. They wanted to sit next to her. At that moment, she realized that the attention she was getting was because of the demon and that she was his new assistant. As it turned out, her connection with the demon had made her a very popular figure in the company, and all the girls envied her. After all, they also dreamed of becoming the guy's personal assistant. But he chose her. But she wasn't going to explain anything, as the rumors had already started to spread and she couldn't change that. She only replied that she had previously worked in a cafe and he was her boss, so he knew her very well and was personally acquainted with her. Moreover, she said he was a good person. Suddenly, she realized she had started to think less about her friend. And she understood that she could actually survive her death even though it was very hard. Suddenly, the girls started talking about Wan Zijia, who was interning at their company and was a real sensation. They suspected the girl might know him since they had interned at the same time. But she denied everything. However, she remembered those times perfectly. When she first came to work and was scared of everything, the guy was the first person she managed to meet. Moreover, he approached her and offered to be friends. They constantly crossed paths since they were in the same room. For both of them, the internship was very tough and boring. It was their common trait that brought them closer. And everything changed the moment the guy treated her to coffee. The girl realized he was a good person, or at least that's how it seemed to her at that moment. From that day on, they spent a lot of time together. They skipped classes together. After all, it was much more interesting to spend time together than to study or work. They became friends with no secrets from each other. When she completed her internship and was assigned a new job, she tried to find him, hoping he would be there with her. The girl could never have imagined that hearing news about him, she thought he could be one of those guys who spread photos. She couldn't believe it and didn't even listen to her new friends. The girls asked her to choose between the two brothers. However, even there she saw Bai Jiho. He was in her head and filled her thoughts. She couldn't do anything about it and couldn't push him away. Suddenly, she saw a message from him. He had found some clues and wanted her to come to him and check everything herself. After work, the girl hurried to him. She couldn't wait to find out what he had discovered. She saw that the guy looked very good. He smelled nice and was wearing one of his most expensive suits. He was about to show her what he had managed to find. So, he handed her a package full of letters. As it turned out, they were the latest news about the mysterious deaths of many women. Moreover, they were so horrifying that they weren't even shown on the news. All the letters had one common detail. After all the events happened in a very short time and occurred every 24 hours. Furthermore, he managed to find information from the last 10 years. Every day someone died. He also had news about a secret organization in their company. But the most horrifying thing was that the killer couldn't be an ordinary person. And that meant that besides him, there was someone else on Earth with incredible power. Most likely, it was an angel. However, it was unclear, why would an angel commit such terrible crimes and kill people? The girl understood that the demon wasn't bad, on the contrary, he was trying to fight evil. Despite the high price she had paid, he helped her and did everything he could. The girl was grateful that he was by her side. Moreover, it was worth finding out how dangerous that angel was. She worried that the demon wouldn't be able to defeat him. She also tried to find out about the director. And as it turned out, she had sent a letter to the mail requesting leave. Meanwhile, Han Xinqian was lying in the hospital. Despite regaining consciousness, she still felt very unwell. Her memory even started to return. The woman wanted to remember everything. But another seizure struck and her whole body began to tremble. Immediately, a nurse approached her, trying to stabilize her condition. But she remembered everything. She recalled her name and tried to ask the orderly for help. But the woman didn't respond and just continued with her work. They were about to inject her with some unknown mixture against her will. Han Xinqian tried to resist, but it was futile. She realized they were watching her. She didn't understand why she was brought to the hospital and why she was being held against her will. Maybe they had just mistaken her for someone else? She was ready to pay the orderly any price for help. However, it was all in vain. She injected her with some drug. When the attack was over, the nurse returned to her usual spot at work. She tried not to show her emotions and how deeply worried she was. However, she couldn't help herself and wanted to check on their new patient. After a while, she found a video, and there was Han Xinqian on it. She also checked some documents. The nurse was amazed that she could remember everything, as this had never happened before. After some time, she tried to wake her up since Han Xinqian had been sleeping for far too long, and it scared everyone. She wanted to know what she would get if she helped the woman. And the barely conscious woman promised to give her all her money and jewels. She also asked to send a message to the main character who also worked at her company. The nurse agreed, but their conversation was overheard. Trouble was waiting for her. The next day, the heroine was working when she was informed that someone had come to see her. It turned out to be the nurse who had agreed to deliver the message. The risk was very high, so she tried to disguise herself and didn't want to attract attention. When she met the girl without explaining anything, she pulled her away to a place where no one would see them. She quickly handed her the note and allowed her to read it only after she left. Everything felt too strange and she ran off without waiting for a response. Unfolding the note, Qianxia couldn't believe her eyes. It was a message from the director who had written her address. There was no time to waste and the woman urgently tried to leave her workplace. She ran, and her behavior was alarming. She also called the demon and told him what had happened. He, along with his bodyguard, was also preparing to go to that place. There was no time to hesitate, and soon they were already there. They rushed inside and tried to survey everything. However, it was empty. Not a single soul. They were too late. Realizing that the hospital had been compromised, the staff had gathered all their things and patients, and they took them to a new, secret location. Seeing and understanding this, the heroine panicked. This meant their only hope of finding Han Xinxian was lost. The place no longer resembled a hospital. However, they didn't lose hope and immediately began searching all the rooms. They wanted to find some evidence, and hoped it would lead them to the criminals. The only way to find out everything was to use the demon's power, and rewind time to see what had really happened. That's exactly what the demon did. He saw unknown people and staff in a panic trying to leave the building. They were carrying out all the equipment and trying to hide all the evidence. They were also taking all the female patients, after which, they loaded them into trucks and drove off in an unknown direction. It seemed they were fleeing to cover up a terrible crime. He heard the screams of the victims and how they begged to be saved. Suddenly, he felt a very strong energy. It was the same man who was in charge of the hospital he was approaching. It was crucial for the demon not to reveal his presence. However, he stopped. It seemed he sensed something. The demon was nervous, feeling that he was very strong and powerful. Suddenly, their eyes met. Bai Jiho couldn't understand how he had managed to see him. However, the man walked past and it seemed the danger had passed. But he stopped again. He turned back to the demon. He didn't like being watched. At that moment, he struck him with his power. This forced Bai Jiho to return to his human body. The blow was so strong that he fell. This terrified the girl as she didn't understand what was happening. What could have frightened him so much? The girl tried to bring him back to consciousness, but it was all in vain. He didn't respond or wake up. At that moment, she was most afraid of losing him, so she tried to call for help. After some time, he was already in the hospital, and the medics were fighting for his life. His condition was critical and the doctors couldn't determine the cause. The girl understood that the risk was too high. Qianxia hoped he would survive, as he was the only one who had helped her. But hope was scarce. She didn't leave his room and waited for him to wake up any moment. She didn't eat anything and didn't react to anything. The girl desperately wanted him to come to her and just be there. She missed him so much. But she knew she couldn't help him. However, there was one way to save him. She couldn't hesitate, so she entered his room without permission. The next morning, the demon continued to sleep. Suddenly, he opened his eyes. He saw his bodyguard standing next to him. He was crying, which was unusual for that man. But the demon was only worried about the girl as she wasn't there with him. He tried to get up from the bed and wanted to go look for her. From the bodyguard's words, he understood that she was in the next room and also unconscious. And despite feeling unwell, the demon ran to her. He couldn't believe what had happened. How could she end up in his place? The doctors assured him that she was fine. In reality, she had lost a lot of blood, which made her body weak, so the coma was necessary for her recovery. However, there was no need to worry, as the doctors were able to help her in time and were trying to stabilize her condition. When the guy realized that she had lost consciousness along with him, he understood everything. And then he asked the doctor to leave him alone with her. He couldn't believe that the girl had made such sacrifices for him. But checking her neck, he saw a fresh bite mark. He got angry, as this could have caused her to lose all her blood, since in his sleep he just couldn't stop. The fact that she was still alive was a true miracle. He kissed her. He was endlessly grateful to her for being willing to risk her life for his. At that time, she was dreaming a pleasant dream in which her dream of becoming a host had come true. There, she was truly happy. Also, the most important thing was that her friend was alive and well. She was always by her side and they spent a lot of time together. They lived nearby, but it was just a dream. The girl started to cry and he wiped her tears. Meanwhile, the events shifted to one of the buildings. There was a lot of security at the entrance and they were checking everyone trying to get inside. One of those people was Tan Jiha. He successfully passed the check and could calmly enter. He turned around, and at that moment he was about to enter the very company where it all began. He smiled. After a while, Qianxia finally managed to come to her senses. She recalled all the events that had happened to her. However, despite feeling much better, the doctors wouldn't let her go and continued to monitor her. To continue the search, she and the demon developed a new strategy. Each had their own goal and everyone was working on finding clues. And they weren't going to stop until they could find Han Xinxian and those involved in her disappearance. She was angry about being in the hospital, but she couldn't change anything. But when she recovered, she would definitely continue and take revenge on all the wrongdoers. Suddenly, a nurse approached her and announced that she had visitors. She thought it might be Bai Jiho and was surprised at how quickly he had come. but she had some doubts. However, as she returned to her room, she stopped. A strange feeling lingered as if someone was watching her. But upon entering, she was very surprised. There was a pile of gifts and fruits on the table. It turned out to be her old friend Wan Zijia, who had found out she was in the hospital and decided to visit her. He was very scared as they hadn't seen each other in many years and it was unclear how she would react to his sudden appearance. And suddenly he changed his mind. But it was too late. Just at that moment, when he was about to flee, the heroine entered the room. She truly hadn't expected to see him, and the guy felt awkward. After a while, he calmed down a bit. They talked about each other, work, education, life. A lot had changed since their last meeting, and they both had stories to share. He even apologized for not being able to open up to her long ago and hiding his true background. This made her blush. She even gave him a few compliments and seemed open to rekindling their friendship. Finally, they managed to relax and restore their lost friendship. Suddenly, Bai Jiho appeared in the hospital. However, upon entering, he couldn't believe his eyes. The guy he saw seemed to be her suitor, and he couldn't understand how he had gotten inside. It seemed he was jealous and perceived the guy as his rival. Seeing his expression, the heroine was confused. He even ignored Wan Zijia when he tried to greet him. He didn't respond to him and didn't want to get acquainted. His behavior puzzled the girl, as he had never been like this before. He was even willing to return to the hospital just to be near her. Wan Zijia didn't pay much attention to his words. He only looked at her and realized he had a competitor. This could be a real challenge for him. Meanwhile, the events shifted to his older brother's office. He was pleased as he had finally found information about his younger brother and who he had been in contact with during his internship. He was flipping through a pile of letters with valuable information. Suddenly, one of them caught his attention. It was information about the main heroine and her parents, whom she hadn't seen in a long time. And her father was Tanjiha. It was at that moment while she was sleeping. Her biological father, Tanjiha, stood in her room watching her sleep. After a while, Wan Zijia left the girl and went home. He was very happy to have seen her and felt joyful. However, someone was waiting in his room. It was his brother, who had been waiting for Wan Zijia's return. His sudden appearance startled the boy. And he noticed how happy he was. It was because of his meeting with the girl. Suddenly, the older brother called her name. He knew everything about her and her family. He did this to protect his brother from evil and potential troubles. He always carefully checked who he associated with. Unexpectedly, he forbade him from talking to her. Even with another person who had the same last name, he couldn't speak. Wan Zijia was deeply upset and wanted to know the real reason behind such a decision. He wasn't going to listen to him as he liked her and was determined to win her over. The next day, the girl was packing her things because she was being discharged from the hospital that day. Suddenly, she heard a nurse talking to someone in the hallway. That voice was very familiar to her, so she immediately paid attention. But the man had already left. That voice was unmistakable, and she ran after him, trying to catch up. She remembered her childhood. How one day there was a heavy rain and she didn't have an umbrella. She could easily get soaked and catch a cold. No one helped her. She was all alone. Other parents picking up their own kids from school couldn't believe that such a good child as her could be left alone. After all, no one even came for her. This made her feel even lonelier. Suddenly, a stranger approached her. He stopped right in front of her and stared into her eyes for a long time. It even scared her. She thought he might be a friend of her mother's. But he didn't say anything. Instead, he handed her an umbrella without explaining anything. The girl was delighted because now she wouldn't get wet. And the man simply walked away. The girl wanted to go with him and shouted after him, but he didn't stop and kept walking. She thought that could have been her father, whom she had never seen. That day it was raining, and because of the noise, she couldn't hear what he replied. But now, as an adult, she couldn't let that opportunity slip away. She was convinced that it was her father. Her heart raced and the elevator took forever to open. But when the doors finally opened, she felt very sad, because she saw Bai Jiho stepping out, who had come to visit her. She had no strength left and barely held back her tears. She didn't want to tell him anything and just asked him to take her home. However, he didn't want to leave her alone as he sensed something was wrong. Besides, it might still be dangerous at her house. But she understood that they had lost all hope of finding Han Xinqian and could only expect that they would come back to her house. She wasn't scared at all and was ready to fight, even risking being kidnapped like Han Xinqian. The demon was impressed by her bravery. Moreover, he had a gift for her and thought it was the perfect time to give it to her. But everything was ruined by a knock at the door. It was a courier delivering a package addressed to her. She hadn't ordered anything, so it was a complete mystery to her. Inside was a note, and it turned out the sender was one Zijia. But the demon didn't like this and became very angry. He grew even more jealous of the boy and saw him as a potential rival. As it turned out, inside was a gorgeous dress. There was also a note where he asked her to go with him to the annual conference and wanted to accompany her. Bai Jiho was furious and ordered the dress to be sent back. He also handed her his own gift that he had planned to give her. As it turned out, it was also a dress, and he wanted her to go to the conference with him. This made her anxious as the choice was truly difficult. The demon hoped she would choose his dress. But she didn't like either of them. After her words, he became even angrier. But she simply decided which dress she wanted to wear. She didn't need any gifts. At that moment, she was about to show him. And opening the closet, she began to remember again. After all, it was a special item for her and her friend. The dress belonged to May and she loved it dearly. She had planned to gift it to the heroine and wanted her to wear it for a very important event in her life. The dress was the most precious gift and the only thing left from her. So, for her, the choice was obvious. Meanwhile, there were only a few days left until the press conference. And the city's most famous stylists were trying to put together a look for the demon. Everything had been planned for a long time, and the boy had no time left for personal life or rest. Additionally, they needed to carefully plan the celebration. Furthermore, they were searching for new leads and trying to track down the criminals. And now it was the day. The boy was in his finest outfit. He was ready to show himself in front of the huge crowd of fans who had gathered for the event just for him. He considered himself perfect and it was a special day for him. But before the conference, he had one important meeting. The heroine felt something was off and wanted to go with him. She was afraid of losing him again, as that would mean losing the chance to find the culprits. Bai Jiho simply reassured her that everything would be fine and that he was in no danger. And he left. He ordered his driver to take her home and ensure her safety. He was in a great mood and was counting on success. But she began to worry even more. Even the personal bodyguard tried to calm her down. Because he was a demon and was not in any danger. She wanted to thank the demon for all his efforts and help. So, she decided to stop by a bakery to prepare something delicious for him. Inside, many famous and wealthy people were already waiting for him. He was greeted by Wan Zihao, who invited him to walk together. He had long wanted to talk to him. This was a great opportunity for him. Moreover, his good acquaintance also wanted to meet the demon and discuss a business proposal. His name was Jin Chung, and when the protagonist saw him, he couldn't move. The room was filled with many other people, all waiting for his appearance. They immediately praised him for his looks, as in real life he was much more handsome than in photos. Right away, they offered him a drink. The boy couldn't calm down. He thought Jin Chung might find out about his plans, and that their meeting was a trap, but he understood that a direct confrontation shouldn't be expected, as innocent people would get hurt. The angel easily read his thoughts. However, the demon also knew how to use this and began to understand everything. The situation was truly strange, as the demon looked very tense, which caught the angel's attention. Suddenly, Jin Chung tried to blame the girl for everything. She was the one who could be responsible for Bai Jiho being in a bad mood. However, as soon as he touched her, the demon stopped him. He grabbed his hand so tightly that Jin Chung tried to force it away. And the demon felt a burn when he touched him. It seemed his opponent was very strong. He understood that, in a direct confrontation, he had no chance. Moreover, he hadn't had time to recover. The long preparations for the conference and the constant use of his own power had drained him. He also realized how much he wanted the heroine to be by his side. But just as he was about to use his powers, he heard a voice behind him. It was Jin Chung. He knew everything and was curious what was so special about the heroine. And why was the demon risking so much for her? He tried to provoke him and began threatening the girl's health. And the demon understood that he was ready to kill anyone for her. However, his words didn't scare Jin Chung. On the contrary, he laughed and vanished. The demon tried to turn back and deal with him. But he realized he had no chance. And the worst part was that at that moment, the angel could teleport to her, so he needed to protect her. Meanwhile, she was returning to her house. But on the way, she stopped by a bakery and picked up some sweets. Suddenly, she felt an incredible cold behind her. She slowly began to back away. However, She felt someone was behind her. Turning around, she froze. Because right in front of her stood Jin Chung. This was the end. He grabbed her by the neck. She started to suffocate. She tried to break free, but he was much stronger and wouldn't let her. He tried to understand what was so special about her and why she caught the demon's attention. Moreover, he felt that she was also thinking and worrying about him. Suddenly, he spread his wings, because he wanted her to truly understand how powerful he really was. Then, what she feared the most happened, because he took off into the air and lifted her to the top of a tall building. He held her at the edge of the building and was ready to let go at any moment. Suddenly, she realized that it was the same place where May had died. The heroine wasn't afraid and stared fear in the face. She spat in his face. This angered the man, as he wanted her and her friend to die in the same spot. More than anything, she wished Bai Jiho would appear at that moment. However, hope was fading and the countdown began. Gradually, the man began to loosen his fingers, and she was about to die. Moreover, she didn't know what had happened to Bai Jiho and where he was at that moment. Seemed this was the end. There was no one to save her, and Bai Jiho never showed up. After all, he let her go. She couldn't believe it had all ended like this. The girl never managed to save Han Xinqian or find the culprits. More than anything, she wanted to take revenge on those who wronged her. But there were no chances left. Suddenly, far off, she spotted a demon flying toward her. Bai Jiho was trying to save her, because in just a few seconds, she would crash. He managed to catch her just a few feet above the ground, and thanks to him, she was still alive. The boy was trying to calm her down, but behind him, Jin Chung appeared, and it seemed he wouldn't stop until the girl was dead. The demon understood that her safety depended on him, and despite being weakened, he was ready to fight to the very end. He assured the heroine that nothing would happen to him, that he could survive and win, and she should run as far away as possible because she could get hurt. She remembered that he hadn't used his own superpower even once, and it was unclear how it would all end. At that moment, she tried to stop him, but it was already too late. The boy transformed into a true monster, engulfed in flames. She wasn't going to run away. She couldn't let anything happen to him. Risking her own life, she stayed. The angel didn't take the threat seriously. He laughed when suddenly the demon began to attack. Powerful blow sent him flying several feet away. He even managed to break a wall of the building. Jin Chen couldn't understand how the demon had become so strong. Moreover, he was incredibly fast, because just seconds later, he was back at it, not giving him a moment to recover. Another strong hit. And then another. It seemed he couldn't control himself. Still, Jin Chung managed to break free. A little more and his face would have turned to mush. With the last of his strength, he teleported away. He understood he had no chance of defeating the demon who had fully transformed and unleashed his powers. So he decided to run. But he promised to meet again. Saying goodbye, he vanished, and the demon was left alone with the girl. However, the dark forces of the demon had taken over him so completely that he just couldn't stop. He wanted to kill and destroy everything in his path. At that moment, anyone could become his target, even the girl. And he lunged at her. Blow after blow, he struck her, and she tried to reach the real Bai Jiho. But she couldn't change anything. Suddenly, a hit. Blood dripped to the ground. He had wounded her. She struggled and wanted to call out to him. But when she opened her eyes, she saw him fighting against his own spirit. Because the demon shielded her with his own wing. At that very moment, Bai Jiho was battling his own demon to save her. He had a terrible wound. She wanted to help. Suddenly, Bai Jiho managed to regain himself. He fought back and was only concerned about her and how she felt. She could see how hard it was for him and the effort he was putting in to save her. Her heart ached from it. But Bai Jiho smiled. He didn't feel pain. But that was a lie. With great effort, Bai Jiho finally managed to rid himself of his evil spirit. However, he was so weak that he couldn't stay on his feet. The girl caught him, preventing him from hitting his head. She wanted him to feel better. She wanted to help him and take him to a safe place. The girl didn't want him to leave her again because she was so scared. Her tears fell onto his face. She thanked him for risking so much for her. Meanwhile, Jin Chung lay in his bed. He was also weakened and needed help. He needed to recover because he had to be at the conference he had prepared for so long. His breathing became shallow as his wounds were very serious. Wan Zihao was trying to help him, but he didn't have enough strength. And when he realized the demon had lost consciousness, he froze. Suddenly, he grabbed a knife. This was his chance to kill the evil angel. But he hesitated. He remembered that day with his father, when he first met him. From that day on, he obeyed him for the success of his father's company, which had made a deal with him. He also remembered those terrible days when the angel killed the girls who came to his house. He brutally murdered them and drank all their blood. It became a real trauma for him. And even when he tried to call for help, it was all in vain. His father didn't respond. Because, as it turned out, he was in on it too and was also involved in the girls' deaths. All the people who were supposed to be his victims were taken to a private clinic. That place resembled a prison more than anything, as all the women were kidnapped and held against their will. His father trusted him much more than his younger son, so he was meant to be his heir. His entire generation was doomed as they had to serve the angel. From that day on, he also became his hostage. But unexpectedly, the man stopped. Instead, he called for help to his house. He decided to leave this job to the demon. After a while, the boy was taken to his own hospital. He didn't regain consciousness, so they had to carry him. The angel was to be placed in the best room and everything possible was to be done to help him wake up. But they were being watched. And it turned out it was Tanjiha who had disguised himself very well. Meanwhile, the girl, along with the guard, was trying to heal the demon and fed him sweets. But when the guard entered his room, he only heard very strange sounds and left, embarrassed. The girl was bandaging his wounds. It hurt a lot, but he endured it. For the sake of the candy. She felt so sorry for him and how much he had suffered. After all, it was all to protect her. Even when she lightly touched him, it hurt him a lot. But she tried very hard to help him and didn't want to hurt him. It pained her to see him suffer and bleed. Suddenly, she said he was precious to her and she was afraid of losing him. Suddenly, the demon turned to her. There was one way he could become immortal. Suddenly, he began to press on his own wound. He pulled out feathers from his own body, which were covered in blood. It might hurt her, but she had to endure. Because as soon as he touched her, she felt a sharp pain and spasms throughout her body. It was unclear what he was trying to do. But immediately a mark appeared on her body. It was a seal, and now he couldn't harm her even when he lost control again. Suddenly, she also took his hand and drew a bird on his arm, which was also a mark for him. It was her talisman meant to protect him from the evil spirit trying to take over. She did it from the bottom of her heart. Meanwhile, Wan Zihao returned to the hospital where the angel lay. Because he had already regained consciousness and felt better, despite being badly beaten and having serious wounds. It turned out the heroine was to blame for their confrontation. Because the angel didn't like that she was with the demon. And when Wan Zihao heard that the girl was his brother's beloved, he panicked. He remembered his father's words who taught him to be decisive and not share with anyone when it came to money or business. His whole life, his father and the angel had taught him this. And the worst part was that Jin Qing didn't respect him and just used his father. At that moment, he thought the heroine just wanted to take the company from him. But in reality, she was only interested in the VIP group's affairs. After all, she was a friend of the deceased Mei. And she just wanted to find her tormentors and take revenge. Moreover, her intentions were serious as she had given her soul to the devil for this. The boy wanted to talk to her, but it was unclear if he could convince her to give up. Then the angel could do whatever he wanted with her. She was a threat, and this was the moment Jin Chang had been eagerly waiting for. Still, the day of the press conference arrived. Everything was lavish and very important guests and company representatives were invited to the celebration. Moreover, everyone knew that a terrible accident had occurred on the roof of the building the night before, so many upper floors were closed off. Additionally, many thought making the demon the face of the company was a good decision, because he had good ratings among the public. Tan Jiha was a waiter and overheard the men's conversation. And when he saw the demon, he couldn't believe his eyes. He remembered how he once sold his own soul to a demon. After all, he and his beloved couldn't conceive and were willing to do anything to have a child. He was so shocked and scared that he even forgot about his own job. Meanwhile, the guy started speaking at the conference. All the girls were watching him and he met the host who was standing next to him. He was incredibly handsome. The main character thought that the guy was weak, and he could take advantage of that to reappear and strike again. She wanted to help him the moment danger approached. She couldn't let him be in danger because he wouldn't be able to survive it again. Suddenly, Wan Zijia appeared before her. He invited her for a walk to chat a bit. He also gave her a lot of compliments, but he noticed one interesting detail. She wasn't wearing his dress. Moreover, he confessed his feelings to her. But all her attention was focused on by Jiho, who was just about to sign important documents. He had already started searching for the main character with his eyes, not wanting her to miss such an important moment. And she realized that she felt nothing for Wanzija, because she liked the demon. She didn't have time to respond because an explosion went off. As a result, a huge number of paper birds, specially decorated, rained down on people's heads. She tried to catch one of them and completely forgot about Wanzija. The guy stood in front of her, waiting for her response. However, she had never thought about a relationship with him because he had always just been a friend. Besides, her fate was tightly intertwined with the demons. So, she wanted to remain just friends. A strange waiter was watching their conversation. Suddenly, he left his colleagues and headed in their direction. Wanziheo was also there, carefully observing everything that was happening. It was the perfect opportunity to talk to the main character and try to dissuade her from her own plan. But she was rushing to the demon because she wanted to support him in such an important moment. However, the man was approaching. But then he stopped. Because at that moment, the demon himself appeared, coming closer to her. He knew someone was stalking her and could foresee it, so he tried to protect her. He was talking to the girl but remained very attentive. She genuinely worried about him and his injuries, which still hurt after some time. But the demon assured her that he was fine. Tanjiha was watching their conversation. He couldn't understand why they were together. It only meant that she had also made a deal with him. Xianxia wanted to go for the interview with the demon. However, there was little time left and he needed to go while she had unresolved matters. She understood that the guy was very popular and had a lot on his plate, so she couldn't distract him. Suddenly, she ran into Wanziheo, who was following her. They started talking, but the girl didn't trust him because, after all, he was the one who invited the demon for a personal meeting last night. And that could mean he was somehow involved in what had happened. He was an enemy, and she couldn't trust him. So she didn't want to linger around him and tried to leave. Suddenly, the man said they had managed to find the culprits and those who could spread the photos. This made her stay for a moment because she wanted to know the truth. But he was just saying that she shouldn't look for the guilty and shouldn't take all the responsibility for the search upon herself. Honestly, he was just trying to dissuade her and asked her not to interfere in their affairs. He also advised her to be more careful. That sounded like a threat, so she didn't want to linger around him any longer. So, after saying goodbye, she just walked away. The man, realizing she wouldn't give up so easily, signaled to his colleague. Tanjiha was watching their conversation. He heard everything and understood that she might be in danger. After a while, an unknown person began to stalk the girl. It was the same man who had attacked her at her home. He was trying to find her in the bathroom where she had hidden. He checked every room, but it was all in vain. And when he was about to leave, he stopped, deciding to check the last stall. He heard a strange sound behind him. It was the heroine, who lunged at him and shocked him. This made him lose consciousness and fall to the ground. But that wasn't the end. She started hitting him in the face. When the attacker stopped resisting, she stopped. It was over for him. Her dress had pockets that her friend had specially made for her. That's what saved her life and allowed her to hide the stun gun. She also called the guard. Tanjiha stood by the door she had entered and began to worry about her, because she had been gone for too long, and he was about to go inside to check. Suddenly, he saw the same guard and hid to avoid drawing attention to himself. He realized she was safe, and his daughter was no longer a little girl and could protect herself. Together with the guard, they tied up the attacker to prevent him from escaping. Suddenly, she noticed Tanjiha through the open door, and immediately rushed toward him. Realizing this, he started to run away because he didn't want to cross paths with her. She tried to call out to him, but it was all in vain. She had no doubt that the man was her father. But Tanjiha only replied that one should never make a deal with a demon. What could that all mean? At the same time, she had a lot of questions. She recalled her entire childhood, and how she was left alone without a father. Where had he disappeared to? She tried to find out where he had gone and what had happened to him. But the man couldn't look at her. It was one of his deals. Still, the girl stopped. The guard tried to support her. At that moment, the demon appeared. He knew what had happened and wanted to support her, because he realized that the man was indeed her father and that he had approached him a long time ago. It was very strange that he returned after so much time. However, he wanted to support her. But she suspected that her father might have also made a deal with him. and she was curious about what he had given him. It made no sense for him to lie.